Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Ghais Hussein. I'll be your instructor for this course, How to Critique a Scientific Paper. Before we start, I have few disclosures and disclaimers I need to put forward. First, I declare that I do not have any conflicting interest in any of the presented material. We have also to acknowledge that the articles that are used in this presentation are meant to be examples, which will vary from one discipline to another. Trainees are encouraged to apply what's being presented at the end of each part of the course in their own disciplines, because again, this is just an example. In your own discipline, you would have your own area of interest that you need to refer to and train yourself on. It's also important to understand that critical appraisal of literature is used for many purposes, as we will see in a few seconds. However, our focus in this course is in using it in the process of literature review. Okay, so basically you're working on a research, you want to decide whether or not to include a certain piece of research. Let's assume that you are conducting a research about the resistance of a certain type of pneumonia to antibiotics in Saudi Arabia among pediatric patients over a given period of time, say for the last 5 years. Okay, so obviously you'll go and do your search, and I do advise to go to there's a dedicated course on VMA on how to review, how to search for literature. So it's beyond the scope of this particular course. As you are doing your search, you are coming across different articles. So are all of them worth citing and including in your research? Obviously not. So basically, how to assess the article critically. This is exactly the purpose of why we are here today in this course. So in this course, you will be introduced to what do you mean by critiquing a research article, to explain why such critique is essential for your research or practice, although again our focus is on research rather than practice, to become familiar with the different types of evaluation criteria, to identify the guidelines of critiquing a research article, and critically assess the work of others as an application of what is being taught in this course. So let's begin with this. What is critical appraisal? It has many definitions, but one of them is it's a systematic process used to identify the strengths and weaknesses of a research article in order to assess the usefulness and validity of research findings. Another definition, the process of carefully and systematically assessing the outcome of scientific research to judge its trustworthiness, value, and relevance in a particular context. Again, although this is more oriented towards evidence-based practice, however, it's still valid even in the purpose of this course, which is to decide whether or not this article need to be in your literature review, to be included in your research. So let's think about it. What do we need to critique articles? They are published. One purpose is literature review. As we've just mentioned, you are working on a research in whatever discipline, in whatever topic. You want to decide whether or not you want this article in your research. The second, which is the more common, it's about you need evidence for practice. It's a part of the evidence-based practice, one of the steps, the key steps actually, in the formulation and the synthesis and searching for evidence, so that to decide whether your practice is up to date and evidence-based or not. But again, this is beyond the scope of this particular course. It could be also for journal clubs. For example, you are in a journal club, you are asked to present an article to your colleagues. So basically, you need to present it in a critical way. It could be an academic assignment. For example, you are undergrad, postgrad student, and you are requested to submit a report with a critical appraisal of an article. It's also important for proposal writing. Again, the more you read before writing your proposal, the better it is. And reading, obviously you cannot read everything, so you need to decide on which article to read and probably to include in your literature review and to help you in writing your proposal. Building a program, it's very important as well if you're, for example, working in the preventive medicine, primary health care, or whatever other discipline, or even in clinical practice. If you want to establish a program, it's also very useful to go through the literature and see the previous experiences. Again, not all the articles that are published are relevant to you or can be included or can be helpful. You need to critique the articles to decide which kind of articles would help you in building a program. Review for abstracts submitted for conferences and workshops. It's useful for those who are submitting and for those who are reviewing these abstracts so that to decide whether or not this abstract should be accepted for this particular workshop or conference. Obviously, for publication, several journals allow for published critiques. So basically, if you have a critical appraisal for a particular study or a number of studies, then perhaps you can have it published. The mainstream model for scientific publication is peer-reviewed journals. So basically, reviewers need to critique the articles they receive to decide to give feedback to the editor, who would decide whether to accept this article or not to be published. Critiquing research is important for funding for research. So basically, those who are in the funding agencies to decide whether or not to accept this project or to fund it. So basically, they need to go through this critical thinking exercise. With this long list, again, our focus is the literature review. The purpose of this course is that related to literature review rather than all the other purposes. However, I do believe that it is useful for whatever other purpose you may need this course for. How to critique an article. This could be the obvious and straightforward question. However, there are a few hints that we need to go through before actually getting our hands dirty and start critiquing an article. First of all, we need to know that there are dozens of forms and checklists that can be used. There is no standard, there is no perfect checklist or form for the critical appraisal of an article. Second is they may vary by purpose, so that, for example, critical appraisal for literature review is slightly different from that used for the systematic review, is slightly different from that used for the evidence-based practice. So these forms may vary. However, they generally agree on a general methodology. Whatever the form you can come across, or whatever the checklist you go through, there is usually a series of questions, whether open-ended or a checklist. Then you decide on each section at a time. For example, starting from the title, then the abstract, introduction, the methodology, results and analysis, discussion, conclusion, and references. Some of them, the forms of the checklist, have added the pre-appraisal assessment, so that even before you start assessing the article, you would have a kind of preliminary assessment of that piece of work. However, overall, it's all about your judgment and the purpose of the critical appraisal. So don't expect that the form or the checklist will solve the whole thing, because basically you need to reflect on the article you are reading to decide whether or not you are going to include this article. Hence, it's better done collectively. At least, this is very strong advice. If you want to go through this exercise of critical appraisal, you need at least one of your colleagues as a reviewer, as a co-reviewer, if you like, so that when you discuss the article together and your assessment, usually two is better than one. Always keep track of what you have reviewed. And again, it's a very strong recommendation that you train yourself on how to use reference management software, whether it be like EndNote, Mendy, Bibliotex, any other software. And you need to report your appraisal in writing. It's not enough that you just think about it, a few comments here or there, or perhaps a few sticker notes on the article, or highlighting certain sentences. This is helpful, but it's not enough. You need to keep a track and a very good record of what did you search, what did you find, and what are your comments on each of the articles that you have found. So let's start. Obviously, we start with the title and the authors. So let's start with the title first. The title, overall, we ask these questions. Is the title clear, accurate, and unambiguous? Again, does the title clearly indicate what the research is about without being extremely long or too short to be informative? Does it precisely state the subject of the paper? So the title basically, it should tell you all what you need to know about it without being too long. It's a little bit tricky and sometimes it's hard to achieve. However, the title is the very first, introduction for me as a reader to decide whether I want to go even to the abstract to read this article or not. So the title should be clear about what's being done, where it's being done, on whom this study was done, and where it was done. And sometimes we add the design to the title. What kind of methodology? Is it a randomized control trial? Is it a case control? Is it etc. Regarding the authors, some people skip the authors part, but I believe that it is important. We ask ourselves, do the researchers' qualifications and positions indicate a degree of knowledge in this particular field? So obviously you will find the authors, you will find their affiliation, and their qualifications, MD, PhD, professor somewhere, consultant somewhere. It's very important to have an idea about their affiliation, as we will see in a second in the following video. And you can know have they published previously on a similar topic, and we find that. So if we go back to the scenario, we expect that the title we are looking for would contain the keywords that were underlined in the first scenario. For example, pneumonia, resistance to antibiotics, pediatric patients, target region, Saudi Arabia in our case, the duration of the time period. So if the title involves preferably 2 or more of these keywords, then it's most probably relevant to our task. Others are expected to be in terms of specialty, to be pediatricians, microbiologists, or any other relevant immunologists, probably relevant to the topic of our search. These are examples of titles, and again, these are just examples. They're not, I'm not putting them as it's the best models or the worst models. Is just an example of how would we go through the titles. The first title is prevalence of antimicrobial resistance in clinical isolates from Gulf Cooperation Council (GCC) countries. It's straightforward. It has the word prevalence. It has antimicrobial resistance. It has the GCC, and Saudi Arabia is part of the GCC, so it seems to be relevant. Other topic is Streptococcus pneumonia in Saudi Arabia, antibiotic resistance, and serotypes of recent clinical isolates. Again, it has Saudi Arabia, it has pneumonia, it has antibiotic resistance. So this could be a good or relevant, at least in terms of its title. One example that may not be as helpful as the other ones is bacterial meningitis in Saudi children. Others studying the prevalence of bacterial meningitis, the treatment of bacterial meningitis, or the complications of bacterial meningitis. So basically, it's not the title as it is not perhaps very declarative, not very clear about what this study is about. Is it a primary source? Is it a original research, or it's a review? It's not clear from the title as it is. How to find authors, other publications, and we can see in this video. For example, I took the example of Google Scholar, one of the titles that we have found. Now you can see the authors, and if you click on it, you can find all the other publications done by these authors. Then we come to the abstract. By definition, or typically, abstract should provide a succinct summary of the contents of the article. Usually, it's from 50 to 250, sometimes a little bit more, but this is the average, 250 to 300 words. It should contain enough information to enable readers to decide whether the article is of interest to them or not. So it's very important. It's kind of your research in a nutshell, in a capsule, so that you tell me the main information about this article. So what kind of questions we need to ask ourselves to appraise the abstract? First, does it explain the purpose of the before the purpose, perhaps it should provide a very short background about the problem they are addressing, and then the purpose of the study, what kind of methods they have used, what are the main findings, what is usually it's one main conclusion or perhaps a couple of conclusions, and what could be the significance of the research in terms of policy or practice. So let's have a look at this example of an abstract. Okay, so this is again the study that we have chosen, the prevalence of antimicrobial resistance in clinical isolates from the GCC countries. Okay, so as we see in this abstract, it has the main parts that we are looking for: the background, objectives, methodology, results, conclusion, and also the keywords, which can be helpful in determining whether or not this article is relevant to our research, given the similarity between our keywords, or the keywords what we're looking for, and the keywords of the in the article. Here we come to the introduction. The introduction, it should be an orientation to the reader about the study in terms of giving background information to the study, about what's being studied, about perhaps some basic definitions, some basic statistics that would help us in providing background information. It introduces us to the research, to the question or the problem addressed in this particular study. It also should be stating whether the purpose, the objectives, the hypothesis, the aim, and the rationale of the research, giving different terminology that are used. What kind of questions we need to ask to assess the introduction? Is the research question or problem relevant to the scope of my task or assignment? So just again, it's a matter of comparison. Again, we're not saying that this article, because it's good or bad, but basically, is it relevant to my work or not? Second question is the background of the research relevant to research question? It's very important. One of the problems that we face a lot, actually, as researchers or as readers, that there's a lot of background information, perhaps too lengthy to the point that it's not relevant to me as a reader. It's not relevant to the problem being addressed or being studied in that research. So it has to be informative but concise. Does the statement of the purpose in the abstract match the one in the introduction? It is very important as well to keep comparing the abstract to the context or to the actual article. The importance of this tells us that the researchers, the authors, have done a good job in maintaining the consistency of what they have, what they are writing. So what they are writing in the abstract is similar to what they are writing in the introduction, and it's similar all over the article. Does all the information lead coherently to the purpose of the study? It is very important, as we will see in a second, using this funnel approach to the introduction, that we need to make the introduction logically takes us to the point that the researchers want to lead us to. So the literature review, it's usually a part of the introduction, and sometimes it's separate. It's meant to have, the authors need to show us, if you like, to convince us that they are aware of the literature, they are aware of the studies, that they are aware of the research that has been conducted in their discipline. So to do so, the references that they are referring to should be quite recent. It should not be old, preferably to be 3 to 5 years, unless there is a necessity for older references. Second is to be relevant to the topic. It's very important as well that for the authors to show us that they are using the literature that is specifically relevant, and that's part of our task in this course, is to help you to decide whether a piece of literature is relevant to your work. So it should be relevant to the topic. It should be focused on the issue. Again, we don't need a lot of background information. It's not a matter of showing us how many articles you have read, because we need something that is focused on the issue. Is it well cited? By well cited, again, this turns us to the point of having reference management software. So it should be well cited. By well cited, I mean at least the referencing style is the same. If it's Vancouver, then it's all over Vancouver all over. If it's Harvard, then it's Harvard all over, and so on. It should be logically organized. As we have said before, we usually start the introduction with general statements and then narrow it down to the point that we, after introducing the readers to the literature, we come to the point that kind of convincing the readers that there is a gap in the literature, and our study is aiming to fill this gap. So this brings us to the rationale of the study. It should be balanced critical analysis of the literature. So the literature is not biased. For example, the author is not choosing the literature which shows a certain trend or a certain of the positive results only, or the results that are going in a certain way, so that a kind of, because this would be biased and not well balanced. It should be preferably from primary sources. By primary sources we mean that original research rather than reviews. Critically appraising the work of others, the literature review, the author should reflect on the literature they are using. And again, this brings us to the very aim of this course. Now we are trying to train ourselves on how to make our review of the literature critical. It's not just a matter of describing them. The literature review also should identify the uninvestigated gaps in the literature, and obviously, and only then perhaps they can justify the rationale for their study. So it's very important to tell us what are the gaps in the literature, so we can be kind of convinced that this is a sensible rationale to conduct the study in the first place. One important hint that I can give you here, that use this section to find further articles. If you read carefully the literature review, it will provide you with more references and more sources that you can make use and to expand your work. Again, the focus of this course is on critically appraising the literature as a part of research, not rather than a part of evidence-based practice.